About 6 months ago, I was discussing on how amazing it was that the Pokemon anime is still running after all these years, with a friend of mine, although I still try to catch it every weekend, and this friend has ceased watching back into one of the old Johto seasons, due to finding this series very repetitive. Now, the final straw, though, he said, elaborating on why he would no longer watch the series, was that episode that was basically a snuff film. Understandably, I scoffed at this premise. You can't seriously tell me that they released a Pokemon or X rated cartoon. He went on to explain that it was a lost episode, not too far of a stretch of imagination. Seeing as how there was already several episodes that had been given a title, he said it was the sickest thing he's ever seen, and that it gave him nightmares for a long time. He refused to share the content of the episode, but instead offering the VHS that he had somewhere in the back of the closet, claiming that I wouldn't believe him until I see it for myself. I had heard about this other popular cartoons having a legendary unaired episodes that were reportedly uncharacteristically disturbing, such as Mickey Mouse.avi and Dead Bart. However, the only evidence of those episodes were poorly made YouTube videos by fans of the stories. I figured that this was simply just a Pokemon's version of such. About a month and a half before I saw this friend again, true to his word, he delivered the videotape, but he promptly left, not wishing to stick around for the viewing. Looking at the tape over, I noticed something strange, save for the fact that it was unlabeled. Already I was getting chills. Having to lean into and learn the potential horrors of the unmarked video cassette from The Ring, I decided to press on and watch it anyway. After all, what was the worst that could happen? Some amateur production of Ash screaming and his face melting? I inserted the tape into my VCR and it started up like the most store-bought shows that films would intentionally. I thought perhaps it was just a standard Pokemon VHS with the label removed. Immediately, though, I knew something was different. When a grainy Japanese title appeared on the screen, the quality was terrible. Maybe like the millionth generation fandubs of Dragon Ball Z I had as a youth. There was no opening theme, just a screen with barely legible hiragana, what I believe was Meow's voice. The actor should say, "My Japanese is very rusty, and the sound quality is very lousy, so the only word I caught was possibly Kojoro." After a few seconds, the title vanished and was replaced with an extreme close-up of Ash's face sideways. In what had believed to be the result of the trashy video quality, it looked like Ash's eyes were wide open, yet completely blank. I soon realized what had been the indeed blank was the focus that slowly zoomed out of from his face. It was clear that there was a trickle of blood emerging from his right temple. I cocked an eyebrow in confusion. The scene then changed to that of James, a sinister grin on his face, or at least what could have been, considering the fact that the video quality was so terrible that I couldn't be for sure if I was making all these details out correctly. What was perfectly clear was that he had a pistol in his hand. James said something that sounded like he was gloating, again because of the poor knowledge of anything outside of basic Japanese and the abysmal sound quality. I wasn't able to make out anything he said, but the voice actor sounded extremely different. More of a deep voice, uncannily like Yazorni Mashusi's fused in the villain in the Dragon Ball animated special show Goku and his friends return. Of course, there was another shot of Ash's body, and it was definite that he had been shot in the head, and blood had stopped actively trickling, but it appeared to be pooled underneath him. Although the video quality made it hard to tell, it appeared that the animation were on the par of the rest of the series going to the first season. If this was indeed fake, it was a darn good one. The focus was switched back to James, who had some sort of wicked-sounding monologue. Jesse and Meowth emerged from their bushes after about 40 seconds, and they took a look at Ash's corpse and started speaking in a high, simultaneously rapid, panicked voices. James interrupted them with a laugh, putting a hand on his hip, and started gloating again. His chest puffed out with pride. Jesse started screaming at him, "I caught Rocketito Dan, Team Rocket, and John Nai Dusu. It's not," but that was all. The scene then focused on an arranged James's face. The detail was still horrid, but it was clear that James was pissed. The focus zoomed out as he pointed his gun off screen to the left, shouting, "Shania, Shania, Shania, Shania," in assistance, telling them to die. As clear as day, the gunshot echoed from the speakers, and Jessie took a bullet to the forehead. She stood looking upwards as I was trying to see the wound, as a splurt of blood sprayed from the bullet hole. She then slowly collapsed to her knees and it fell face first onto the ground. Meowth started yelling something that procrastinated his claws, leaping in the air with the speeds of the background. He was stopped by a short bullet to the abdomen. Meowth then captured backwards as blood leaked from the wound. James laughed in triumph as he ran off, clearing into the forest. At this point, I began to wonder if this was indeed a legitimate production from the anime studio. What if some sort of sick minds would develop such a thing? At the very least, it was apparent that the roles of Jessie and Meowth were voiced by their usual seiyuu, which is further complicated in the matter. Why would they participate in such a production? The scene then shifted to Ash again, and Pikachu approached the body. Happy shout of "Pika-Pee!" was soon followed with several confusions repeated of "Pika-Pee?" It was then cut up to a close-up of Pikachu's face. As he realized what had happened, tears started streaming down its face with a very depressed "Pika-Pee," and then outright crying. I began crying too, feeling bad for the adorable little fella and the professional favorite character of mine who had just lost his best friend. I tried drying the tears as the screen shifted back to James, running through the forest. It appears as if he had a wicked smirk on his face, and I could hear his voice, which had some sort of echo to it. And since his mouth wasn't moving, I deduced that he was thinking or something. A few seconds later, Pikachu's very enraged voice cutting through. James then looked startled, then skipped behind the tree, and his back pressed up against it. He continued thinking, and his expression panicked for several seconds before evil grin returned. Pikachu approached the tree, shouting angrily. James slipped out from behind the tree, pointing the gun at the mouse. "No," I said. "Don't hurt Pikachu." I wanted to grab the remote and shut off the tape, or at least the TV. Unfortunately, my hands felt like two cold stones at the end of my arms, and I don't think I had the willpower would be allowed them to move. Likewise, I was able to look away. Before James could fire, however, Pikachu attacked with an electric attack, shouting, "Pikachu!" in the same enraged voice had been yelling at James with. The attack hit spot on, but instead of the goofy zapping animation that I had one time to expect from Pikachu's attacks, James' hair and clothes began to catch fire as he screamed, almost an inhuman scream that I've ever heard. It didn't sound like of the show's voice actors, including his voice of James, but instead some sort of guttural yell in pain, like of some sort of animal or demon. I began to zoom in on James as his hair began to thin from the fire. His shirt had partially fallen off, and his skin was charred and began to drop to his knees. The fire then ceased, and all was left of James as he fell to the ground was bald, cooked corpse with a half of his shirt. Pikachu fired off 2 more electric attacks, yelling through with tears. This served no effect on James other than causing him to flop about a bit of intentional impact. I was surprised to see Misty run into the patch of forest where Pikachu was standing. She ran up to Pikachu and said something, wrapping her arms around the yellow mouse. Both of them began sobbing heavily, and the scene then ended with Pikachu's tear-streaked face close up. Then they cut to static that startled me, especially with this entire production that seemed to be a last not, but 8 minutes total. So fast forward to see if there was anything after the static, but there was nothing. I shut off the video and rewound it, putting my head onto my hands, trying to decompress. I had definitely have seen much worse than that what I just occurred on my screen, but the fact that the Pokemon was more or less wholesome was made it really disturbing. What really got me seeing how sad Pikachu was, that it itself was depressing. After about 10 minutes I had passed before I decided to call a friend who lent me the tape. He refused to discuss the content, and only question would be the only answer was the origin of the tape. Apparently he had found it in a random drawer of his. He had no idea how it appeared there. There was an awkward silence for about a minute after this, before my friend spoke up again. "Didn't you see what was at 2:16, did you?" I replied negative and not recalling the timestamps or anything that would have stood out. His response was good, you don't want to. He then abruptly hung up. I knew that I should have heeded his warning, but curiosity got the better of me. I flipped the tape again and fast forwarded to about 2 minutes in. Watching closely, I could definitely see something flash on the screen very briefly. I had missed before. Going back to the 2:10 mark, I advanced frame by frame until I came across a screen that I'd been likely referring to, one that nearly forced me to change my pants. It was some sort of bear-like creature with spiraling goat-like horns. It was no Pokemon that I have ever seen. And strangely, his frame was much cleaner than the rest of the video. The art style was vastly different, much more detailed and realistic, like Alex Ross painting. The most terrifying part was that Brock was strung up in the tree across the beach and was pulling his, well, organs from a large gash in his gut. I knew that this scene was not supposed to be present, or was monstrosity that had been disemboweled Brock was. I immediately ejected the tape and took a lighter to it, setting it on fire while praying it. After the tape had melted suffocatingly, I doused it with holy water to put out the flame. After it had been cooled off for me to handle, I thrown it into the empty box lying around and immediately ran outside just to heave it in the trash. And that, my little pretties, was Set It with a Bullet, a Pokemon Lost episode creepypasta written by the S. My final thoughts on this story? I found this one to be an okay story. I remember hearing, a couple narrations from this story. Like, I remember Shadow narrated this story back on his old channel before it got terminated. And by the way, he did re-upload it, not too long ago, so you guys can go watch Shadow's narration on that if you want. Yeah, I've actually seen a couple narrations from other people on this story. So I thought I decided to go ahead and, narrate this story because, I remember narrating this back in 2020, yeah, 2019. I do remember I narrated this back then. And yeah, I actually thought it was an okay story. And it's still an okay story to me. Despite the fact that there were cliches in the story, I'm gonna definitely say that the story actually was a decent, Pokemon pasta. It's an okay story. I wish it could have been better though. Like, the main reason why I absolutely did not care for the story was the cliches. Like, the VHS cliche, I'm willing to somewhat excuse it because it's, somewhat believable. But the beginning of it does need, to be I don't really know what to think of this, but mostly by the fact that, so many creepypastas have done, VHS tapes, over and over and over again. The story did seem to be somewhat believable in a sense, like the beginning part of it. But what would help it better is maybe if there's like a backstory or something, maybe that way it would be, somewhat better in my perspective. At least that's my perspective and my own thoughts personally, but I really don't know. Another thing I could definitely say that I wish it could have been fixed was not fixed, but could have been better was the fact that there were a couple cliches. Like, I remember there was no hyperrealistic blood or anything like that. But I mean, the beginning seemed to be a bit cliched, but at least I'm willing to excuse the VHS tape because I could see it somewhat believable now. And I like how the fact that the episode, contains, why James has gone, insane, crazy enough to kill Ash in the process. I mean, I know Team Rocket, would kind of do something like this, but I know they wouldn't do something like that to Ash, but I haven't seen Pokemon in like a really long time. I haven't watched the show in like years, so I probably might be wrong on that. Yet again, if they were psychos, maybe, but I really would have to say it's definitely something. Like, Jesse and Meowth, didn't like the idea, but having them being killed by James, I definitely say it's uncharacteristic of James to do that, since they're his teammates, but yet again, he might end up going that crazy enough to do so. Another thing I definitely do like was that Pikachu got his revenge on James for killing Ash by frying him with his electric powers. I'm like, oh my goodness, that's really dark. Like, I mean, I've seen Pikachu, gone that crazy before. So there's definitely that. I've seen Pikachu, roast Team Rocket basically with in the show. If you haven't watched the show, but I haven't watched it in years, so yeah. I haven't watched the show in like a long time, so this brings me back somewhat memories because I used to watch this show constantly as a kid. I still watch it every now and then. I just don't really watch it as much as I used to. Now, another thing, and this is kind of like a big issue, is the fact that, well, there's like this little demon creature with spiraling goat like horns, earns like the demon cliche. Ugh, my goodness. Like, why does it always have to involve demons and creepypastas? Like, why did the demon thing have to be thrown in the episode? There's like no reason for the demon part to be in the creepypasta. It doesn't really work. Another thing I have to say was that, the way Brock was, killed. I mean, I was gonna, not bother narrating that part, but I forced myself to do it because why not? Now I know I remember the first few times reading this. I didn't narrate this on my channel in 2018, but I did remember Shadow Reader did an older narration of this back then on his old channel, so I checked it out. And I read the story a couple times. I'm like, oh my god, are you serious right now? Like, that's exactly how I felt like when reading the demon part, and the same thing what I'm saying now. I mean, another big issue I would have to say about, this episode, well, this story, is the fact that, the protagonist sits there, takes a lighter to it, and, burns the tape, and then puts holy water on the flame. Like, really? Like, I mean, other pastas have done something similar to this, but I mean, like, you're destroying a tape that is not yours that someone gave to you. You need to have the person's consent before doing so. Like, if that was, if the protagonist asked a friend for their consent to destroy the tape, that'd be one thing. But at the same time, I mean, like, burning it is one thing, but pulling holy water and sending prayers to it, thinking it's a demon gonna come out, like, oh my goodness. Like, that was not necessary for this story. Like, it was not necessary for how the ending should gone out. Like, I really would have preferred like a satisfying ending or something. At least that is what it is to me. I could be wrong, however, but I really don't know because yeah, other people have narrated this story as well. Now, the grammar of this story was pretty good, I'm not gonna lie. Same with the sentence structuring, the paragraph structuring. Basically, how the story was, structured was fantastic. So I was able to read this, very well. Only maybe a few grammatical errors here and there I did spot it, but other than that, it was an alright story. It's not the best Pokemon Lost Episode pasta I've seen, but it's definitely out there. I mean, I found this on the Pokepasta wiki. In case you guys want to go check it out, feel free to go check out this story. I mean, this story did seem to be was somewhat okay, but the story of its own self, at times, it's just a cliche story. Although I do wish that, if the demon part was not included in the story, that the story would have been better, and then it would have been more realistic in a sense. Anyways, with that being said, yeah, this is simply my own personal opinion, and if you happen to disagree with me, that's fine too. We're all entitled to our own opinions regarding these creepypastas, and this is simply my own personal thoughts. My final rating of this story, I'm gonna give this one a 6 out of 10. It's not a bad creepypasta, it's not a bad pokepasta, it's an interesting concept, like, but until we get to the ending with the demon thing, I mean, the demon thing was not necessary, and, burning the VHS tape and even, pouring holy water on it. I know burning it is one thing, but putting holy water on it, thinking it's going to be, a demon or something, like, it doesn't really work in the story. Another thing I have to say is that the VHS cliche, if that was taken out, then maybe that way the story would have been somewhat all right, but I mean, this is not a terrible it's not a terrible pokepasta. It's definitely a decent one. I'm just going to sit here and say I find this one to be an okay story. Maybe not the best Pokemon Lost episode pasta there is out there, but it's definitely something worth reading. Now, anyways, with that being said, what did you guys think about this creepypasta? Did you enjoy it? Did you not? Also, what we have done person to help make this story a lot better? Feel free to leave me now with your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm the Queen of Lions. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. And if you're new to my channel, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe because I make brand new videos every single day. Don't forget to ring the notification bell to when I upload so that way you guys will not miss an upload. And as always, please roll the outro because I'm out.